Hey, deserving listeners, a number of you have been asking me to react to this interview with Raquel from Vanderpump Rules. She is on Bethany Frankel's podcast, and I thought I would do that now. I want to say, though, that I didn't realize I'm recording this intro after the fact because I didn't realize that there was a video of the interview. So I ended up reacting to another video on YouTube that was made by Sunshinery, in which Sunshinery listens to the audio of the podcast and reacts to it. So this entire series of episodes is me listening to the podcast with Raquel and Bethany as it was posted on Sunshinery's YouTube channel. And then after I recorded everything, I realized that there's an actual video of I apologize. But anyway, let's get to chapter 1 in this episode series.
It's easy to get wrapped up in that. And then the concept of an affair hits home. It's really hard to a lot of people. So I think there was a lot of projection happening, a lot of emotions that came up for people. And
yeah, absolutely. That's very wise of Raquel to recognize that a lot of people have been very, very harmed and hurt by infidelity. And it's one of those harms and relational traumas that people just don't really acknowledge or value or emphasize. I feel like I'm talking with a lot of people in my office and friends for that matter who were cheated on 5, 10, 20 years ago and are still suffering from that. And when they talk about it with other people, then they're like, get over it. It completely flips your world on end, potentially, depending. For some people who have been victimized by infidelity, it calls into question, especially if you have previous relational traumas along these lines, but even if you don't, it calls into question every relationship you've ever been in and every relationship you ever will be in. Like with Tom Sandoval, Raquel, and Ariana. When you're Ariana, you wonder about, so for the past year, and maybe even longer with other women, you've been doing this whole other thing, which indicates that you've been thinking this whole other thing other than what you've been telling me. You've been saying to me that you love me and you want to be with me. You've been acting like you're a partner, but you weren't. It was the opposite. You were not only not loving me and not with me, but you were actively deceiving me and working against me and doing things that you knew would really hurt my feelings. That rewrites that whole history, and you have to wrestle with this notion of like, so I felt like I was in a relationship that was stable, maybe even with a little conflict here and there. But, I thought that I was standing on a foundation of trust, being able to trust my own judgment, being able to trust human beings in general, partners in general, that when someone says they love you and they're not cheating on you, that they're not doing those things. And now I have to wonder about every past relationship. Was this person ever in love with me? Did anyone ever love me in my entire life? Again, especially if you have traumas around this sort of thing. And how can I ever trust anyone ever again? Because I'm not with these people, my partners 24/7. So there's a chance that every relationship I'm going to be in, every relationship I'm in right now, is a pack of lies. It really rocks people. So when they watch a show like this, it can very much trigger that hurt, that unprocessed, unsupported, pain, meaning that there's a lack of support around it. And then all that anger comes pouring out, and depending on who you identify with, you end up going after someone. And Raquel's talking about how a lot of people were going after her. Now, are there legitimate criticisms? Yeah, but I'm guessing what Raquel is talking about is the intensity of the criticism and attacks were fueled by the pain that other people have been through.
I do want to take a moment to just acknowledge the hurt that I brought to a lot of people. I was not careful in my actions, and I was not thinking long term. I was completely wrapped up in heartbreak and wanting to get certain needs met. Looking back now, I can see that I was still healing from a relationship from somebody who I thought I was going to marry.
Yeah. So it all depends on whether you believe that she's making excuses or if she's providing context and background while still admitting fault and taking responsibility and expressing remorse. Her statements here are consistent with the approach she had during the reckoning episodes that they had, right? Contrasting her with Tom Sandoval, she seemed like a deer in headlights, someone that was suddenly aware of the reality of what she had been doing and was not sophisticated in her understanding or didn't have measures in place to, counter her denial. Because when you're in denial, which we all do, by the way, and there's no opportunity to question your denial, because when Tom and her were having the affair, the only people that could question them and say, hey, do you really know what you're doing? Have you thought about what you're doing? Would have been the two of them. And of course, they were incentivized not to raise that question even amongst themselves, let alone to question the other person. And I think for the two of them, they were running away from something. She's talking about how she was running away from the pain of a past breakup. And when you're in that sort of denial, it's very easy to just continue down the road without thinking about the consequences, I'm guessing that Raquel, maybe she'll get into it, if she could go back in time, she would have, at the very least after the first incident, would have said, look, Tom, until you're broken up with Ariana, this can't continue. In fact, we shouldn't even be talking.
Based on where you are now.
Yes, I still stand by that apology. It is full circle in a way, talking about that need to be validated and that wanting to be loved. It took me a while to accept, but I learned about love addiction, and it's a real thing. It's where you confuse intensity for intimacy.
The pheromones and the oxytocin and all those things. Is it called oxytocin?
Yeah.
Okay, so to catch you up, Raquel said that she was originally named Rachel, which I had heard from some people, and people were criticizing her for having this fake, fancier name, Raquel, and trying to seem more fancy. And Raquel was saying that when she was young, there was another Rachel in school or something, and she wanted to differentiate herself somehow and chose Raquel. And she acknowledged that it was, out of convenience, but also maybe out of insecurity about who she was as a person. And then she's in therapy in the recent months and discovered that she thinks of her, and her family calls her Rachel, but her friends call her Raquel. And she, in therapy, discovered that maybe returning to Rachel, returning to her true self, is a therapeutic healing thing. So she's apparently changing her name to Rachel. I don't know if it's in all contexts, but that's what she was saying. But now she's talking about love addiction. So the working definition, I think, is that similar to any other addiction, like with alcohol or gambling, some people have this experience where they feel compulsively driven to be in love or to have secure relationships, and they'll be very obsessive about it. And and as I talk about this, if you watch any of my videos, it just sounds like preoccupied attachment, right? So I don't know why we don't just use that term. Plus, when people use the term love addiction, I think it is a way for some people to deny, one, what really is the cause of it, because insecure attachment has a whole way of investigating and treating that insecure attachment, preoccupied attachment. So to go down an addiction treatment route would involve 12-step groups, and maybe, like, if you're trying to quit alcohol, if you're trying to abstain from alcohol, the things that you do to achieve that goal of abstinence is not the same set of things that you would do if you're trying to recover from insecure attachment. There might be some overlap, but they're very different treatment models. And so I worry that if people think of it as love addiction, they won't get the treatment that they need, and might even compound the issue, right? Especially if the model is abstaining, because if you have preoccupied attachment at your core, you lack secure attachments. We have a need for secure attachments. All humans have this, generally speaking. So when you try to abstain, and I don't know if that's what people do with love addiction treatment, but I think that's often what I hear, is people will just try to go cold turkey on relationships and sex and dating. And if that also involves having secure relationships with friends and family, then okay. But if it doesn't, which often preoccupied individuals, all of their relationships are insecure, then to abstain and to, buckle down and hole yourself away would make it worse potentially. It might make it better in the fact that your life is less chaotic because you're not chasing someone around and you're not in conflict all the time, but you're still not getting your needs met, right? I also think that when people talk about love addiction, it makes it seem like, well, I suffer from a disease. There's a lot of debate in the treatment and assessment of addictions like alcohol and gambling regarding seeing it as a disease, meaning that you're born with it or you're afflicted with it and you don't have any control over it. I will say that in alcohol treatment and recovery, that model, that way of thinking can often help, because what I think it does for people is it helps the person trying to recover acknowledge how powerful it is. When you have cancer as a disease, you don't think, well, I'm just going to overcome it with willpower, or this will just go away. No, you have to treat it very seriously, and there's a lot of things you have to do. Well, with addiction to alcohol, especially if the addiction is moderate to severe, then it has to be taken very seriously as something that is endemic to the human being and can't just be wished away or isn't a temporary thing. It's an ongoing problem that you'll have to monitor and deal with seriously the rest of your life. That's the mindset of someone that is more likely to recover than otherwise. And so framing it as a disease, I think, helps people to acknowledge the seriousness of it and the ongoing chronic nature of it. So to frame it, love addiction, as this disease model, and I don't know if that's what Raquel is talking about, I think, again, is moving away from what I think people should be considering. If you have preoccupied attachment and you're the pursuer and you're dependent on others and you're frequently defining yourself through relationships, the cure is to have secure relationships with people that you actually can cultivate and build over time, such that you learn that you don't have to pursue and you don't have to regard your intrusive thoughts that are telling you that everything's going to fall apart at any second now. Because when you have secure attachments and ongoing curative relationships, like with a therapist or with other people, then your preoccupied attachment starts to fade away because you learn cognitively, but also neuron-wise, brain-wise, it changes things for you, so you don't have those intrusive thoughts or those worries anymore. To go down a love addiction path, I worry that people won't see that or tend to that. But let's hear what she says here.
I learned about love addiction, and it's a real thing. It's where you confuse intensity for intimacy.
Okay, so she's saying that she confuses intensity for intimacy. Okay, so yeah, again, this is within undifferentiated preoccupied attachment language. For me, I would frame it as saying that for some people, because they're desperate for secure attachments, which everyone is. We talk about securely attached individuals as mature and able to live relative happy, balanced lives. I think an American way of seeing those individuals, those healthy individuals, is that they don't really depend on others and they're fine on their own. They're independent. And yeah, that's half the story. But the other half of the story is that these healthy individuals are very acknowledging of their need of dependency and intimacy and relationships. So they're able to be independent, and they acknowledge and cultivate relationships with others because they know they can't be independent all the time. They have to depend on others. They have intimacy needs. So for preoccupied individuals, in my language, or in the attachment theory language, these individuals are walking around with a lot of past traumas that tell them, anyway, whether or not it's true, but they narrativize it as you can lose relationships at any time. That you can't really depend on others, but you need others. And you love others more than they really love you. That's a narrative that a lot of preoccupied people will think. They'll just go like, I have so much love to give and no one ever matches me. I'm always like scraping crumbs off the ground in terms of love while I'm giving them full feasts of love, you know? It's understandable how preoccupied people would see it that way based on their experiences, because they actually play a role in engineering those experiences of the feast versus crumbs imbalance. But and if they change, then there can be feasts going both ways, or a well-balanced meal going both ways. Anyway, so for preoccupied people, they, for some of them, their defense against the pain and worry of relationships falling apart is they will, one, try to engineer intense relationships very quickly, because they're desperate for security and they need it so badly because they've never had it. So they can't wait for things to build over time. They need it to happen right away. So not everyone who's preoccupied will do this, but many of them will. And these are the sort of folks that will fall in love very quickly. They will declare, oh my God, we need to get married very quickly. And whether or not it's wise to do so. They might even have affairs with people, because the affair relationships can carry with it an intensity. Like for Raquel, I don't know if this is what she's saying, but she might be saying that because I was insecure and because I had this love addiction, or what I would call preoccupied attachment or attachment insecurity in general, I needed a relationship to be intense because I was confusing intensity for intimacy. And when Tom was approaching me with romantic or sexual gestures, it said to me, well, so he's in this long-term 9-year relationship with Ariana. For Tom to be interested in me must mean that he really wants to be with me, because he's giving up so much. Look at all the things that he's sacrificing to be with me. That must really mean that I'm in a secure relationship. But of course, if you focus and privilege that intensity and that clear indication of love and of security while ignoring what's healthy and what is good long term, then you might be attracted to a cheating sort of style relationship, right? Because for these preoccupied individuals, for them to date, and maybe Raquel was doing this otherwise, right? She's going through the normal motions of dating and feeling out relationships. And those kinds of ramp-ups in relationships take time. They don't always work out, right? You have to test things out. Sometimes there's incompatibilities, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And if you're desperate for something to happen right away, and you have this guy who is approaching you, then you might take that because and convince yourself that, oh, this is secure, because look how much he loves me, and look how perfect we are together, because things are so intense, and yes, things are going to work out, this denial and convincing of the self. So that's the way I would frame it. I wouldn't frame it in the love addiction language, but each of their own.
The pheromones and the oxytocin and all those things. Is it called oxytocin?
Yeah. And those.
So they mention pheromones, oxytocin. So again, within the love addiction language, sometimes there's this talk about brain chemistry, and they will cite certain studies or ideas within biology that will bolster their point of view. And we can talk about that, but again, it's a little problematic because it's saying that with oxytocin, for example, that it's addictive. But that is the wrong way to think about oxytocin. It'd be like saying that when you're thirsty and you crave water, you're addicted to water, and so I need to abstain. No one would do that, hopefully. Well, that's the same thing. We need oxytocin. Oxytocin is a good thing. Attachments and relationships are a good thing. The positive chemistry in the brain that occurs when you're in love or in a secure relationship is a good thing. You don't want to see it as the enemy. The way that you see, for example, the positive brain chemistry that occurs when you drink alcohol or when you use cocaine or when you gamble, that is the enemy. And it's not something that you need. Your brain is trying to convince you you need it, alcohol, gambling, cocaine, but you do not need it. It's actually destroying you. But with relationships, You need relationships. It's a good thing that you want relationships, just like water. It's a good thing you're craving water when you are thirsty. It's a good thing that your brain gives you all these negative experiences in terms of neurochemistry when you aren't drinking water when you're thirsty. And then when you drink water, it floods the brain with all this positive chemistry, to reward you and to try to lock in that behavior. That's not addiction. That's meeting your needs. That's the system that's being hacked by alcohol and cocaine and gambling. So that's another reason why I just wish that people would frame it more in the attachment language rather than the addiction language.
Those chemical changes in the brain are the same chemical changes that happens when you take drugs. So it is addictive, and it explains why I couldn't stop seeing this person, but it also doesn't excuse the fact that it happened. But now I know better.
Okay. And if it helped Raquel to refrain from seeing Tom, then great. But it doesn't sound like it did because, well, maybe. So after the reunion, Raquel and Tom were still maybe together, right? And maybe Raquel is talking about how this model of thinking, this love addiction model, helped her to refrain from seeing Tom altogether. I don't know. But the other thing is, and let me rewind because she says something at the end here.
Doesn't excuse the fact that it happened, but now I know better.
Right. Now I know better. What is that? I'm curious. What does she know better? Because in some love addiction discourse that people will have, it will be this lesson learned of, I need to be highly skeptical and refrain from relationships and from intimacy. I have to question everything, and I have to try to be above it. I have to try to survive independently. And, that can be healthy. And it's certainly an American point of view and a patriarchal point of view for that matter, and potentially counter to what could help people. It's weird to consider this to be kind of revolutionary in terms of something that a therapist would help someone with. But if Raquel came to me with this problem, I don't know what would work because we'd have to use a lot of trial and error and assessment. But my general hypothesis would be figure out your needs and figure out how you can meet them in a way that doesn't destroy yourself, Maybe being in a relationship with Tom absolutely can be a part of that. I don't know, but it's about knowing who you are and being able to be in line with your integrity and not harming other people and not harming yourself. And that's a complicated process, especially acknowledging the fact that you need relationships, right? All right, well, that does it for that episode. I want to thank Sunshinery for having this on their channel, because I think what happened was someone emailed me a link, and so I just went to that link, and it happened to be the Sunshinery version. So anyway, and everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.